Carol Schaefer was 19, pregnant, and unmarried. Her parents told her that her only option was to give up her baby, and so she did. This book, The Other Mother, is a story about the search for her son that she gave up, and she found him again on his 19th birthday. Welcome, Carol.
Thank you.
First of all, we should talk about the home for unwed mothers that you were placed in. I think that had a lot to do with your decision to give up your child, too. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, the homes were there to solve a major problem that society had really created back then. If you didn't have a husband, you couldn't keep your child, basically, unless you were a real strong woman and came from a strong family. We had been told that it would be best not to marry, that we didn't have enough money or resources to start off a good marriage, and that it would be best for the baby to give the child up to a family that could provide so much more than we could. So we went to the home, and I went to the home, and there was no counseling there. This was very interesting, even to think that it's hard to even imagine now in the 90s and after going through the 80s that in the 60s psychology was frowned upon and the concept of counseling hardly existed. What we were told almost daily as a litany was that if you love your child, you'll give him up, that it would be selfish to keep him, you would be loving yourself more if you did. And I started to imagine this wonderful family that could do so much more for him than I could. They took care of our physical needs, but we really couldn't ask for much else. I also felt, in some ways, intimidated to express my feelings because we were not, I was afraid he would not go to a good family if I expressed how I was feeling.
Okay. Well, you gave up the baby for adoption, and you tried to forget, but you just weren't able to. Right. Later, you went through college, and you married, and you had 2 sons of your own with your husband. Did you still think about it even then? Was it something you thought about all the time?
I thought about him all the time. We were told we would forget in the home. They said that this, we would forget, the child would be in a home, we could be rest assured, and we would go on and have other children and live happy lives. I'm very fortunate to have had 2 other sons. A lot of the women, and they're finding that it could be even as high as 60% never have other children. There's some kind of secondary infertility that does happen from the trauma of the separation from this child that they had given up. I always knew I would search for Jack. I think that kept me sane. It kept my power in a way. A lot of women didn't feel like they had that option, and they just thought it was an endless proposition for them, that they would never see their children. But I always did.
All right. At what point did you actually decide and actively start to search for him?
On his 18th birthday. I lived until his 18th birthday. I was living a half a life up until that point. And I don't know when I created that magical number. It was probably because I thought he was through high school or something. I'm not even sure. I can't even remember. But I started on his 18th birthday. And I talked to him for the first time on his 19th birthday.
Okay. What did you do to find him? I know that it wasn't easy because the records were sealed and so forth. How did you actually find him?
Well, I had to rely on search groups in North Carolina because that's where the Catholic Social Services was. That's where the records were. And so I had to find a group that would help me. And now there's networking groups all over that help people from different parts of the country.
Okay.
They were the ones that gave me his name. They gave me a list of 10 possible names that would fit all the requirements for that time of birth and this particular adoption agency. So I just had to choose which names I'd send for the birth certificate. And they gave me one name that was a possibility. And as it turned out, that child had died when he was 7 years old, which was a horror to me because I had no idea if my child was alive or dead. And it was a great fear that he maybe wasn't living. It's the same feeling that if your child's lost in the park, just even for a couple minutes, and you have this panic, and you live with that panic until you know where they are. You don't even know you're living with that panic until you find them, and then it's just gone. The peace is unbelievable.
Okay, you were lucky because the woman who was Jack's adoptive mother was open to your to being with him. But tell us about that. And she was a widow herself.
Well, Jack had quite a life.
Yes, it sounds like it.
Before he was even 2 years old, he had so many losses. It was incredible. I had been told that he would go straight to the adoptive parents, and he actually had gone to, which was typical, went to a foster home for 6 weeks where they observed them. Back then, there were so many children, they could really promise a good white baby, you know, healthy, but they did have this 6 weeks period. Probably also it had to do with whether I changed my mind, but I wasn't even aware that I could. I mean, it wasn't something I felt I was able to debate. Anyway, what
The first family, though, that he was actually placed with.
He was taken back because they were getting a divorce.
And so how long?
Rosemary, his adopted mother, got him when he was 8 months old.
All right.
Yes.
So he went into a foster home, then was placed with a couple who got a divorce, and then was placed
In
back
another foster home,
and then finally with his
yes.
adopted mother.
Yes.
And what she told you was that her husband then was killed in Vietnam later
When
on.
Jack was about 22 months old.
So she felt that it was a real blessing for her, and that this was meant to be, that she was to have the little boy.
Yes. Well, because she felt that he saved her life, basically, because he gave her something to live for. And they became very close through this experience. Not that she didn't love him all along.
Now, when you told your own sons about this, you finally, they were little boys, and you said to them, I have something to tell you. You have another brother.
Yes.
And I love what one of them said, do you think he could be John Elway? That was the first question that they asked you.
Well, they loved sports, and John Elway was quite a person then, being wooed by the football league and the baseball league. And they really created the fantasy like everyone can do when there's adoption, because I mean, I'm sure Jack imagined a range of things about who his parents really were, and I had all kinds of imaginings about him. And here my sons knew about him for 2 seconds and created this great fantasy.
So they didn't have a lot of trouble accepting that then?
I think initially I loved their reaction. They were just so compassionate for 2 children, one in 7th grade and one in 4th. They understood the loss that I had instantly, and I was so gratified. From that moment on of telling them and really becoming more truthful to them as their mother, you know, it was like, now I'm a complete family. They know that they have a brother. I was beginning to heal right at that moment, that when they could know as well. But they went through phases. I mean, they thought, could he be a nerd? We won't like him at all. I mean, it hasn't been easy for them.
Okay.
It's been great, and it's been hard.
All right. So you called him on his 19th birthday. That was the first day that you talked to him. And what did he say to you?
Well, I had talked to Rosemary before that, and we had had about a 4-hour conversation, but Jack wasn't home. And she filled me in on his whole life. It was just extraordinary to sit there and listen. And I'm really glad that we got to talk, and we evolved a relationship at that point. And she says that she was glad that we talked first, because she needed that reassurance that I wasn't going to come and disrupt their lives. I waited afterwards for almost over a week for him to call me, and he didn't. And I was getting panicky again that maybe he changed his mind, maybe they changed their minds. And I decided to call him on some urgings from other people that on his 19th birthday. And again, Rosemary and I talked first, and then Jack came home, and I can't even tell you how it felt. I wasn't even prepared for that instant when I heard his voice. It was just magical.
And now you have some grandchildren as a result of having made this reacquaintance.
Yes, and I was writing the book at the time, and I said, did you think I needed an ending to my story? Because they went through the same process. They got pregnant before they were married, and they were terrified of telling their parents, and they told me, you know, because they knew I would be a safe person to tell. I wasn't going to judge them about it. And Jack, in some ways, almost recreated it, because he has 2 children now, and they've struggled, but they've made it. They have a lot of family support to help them, and which is what I believe needs to happen, is that families need to come together and help their children keep their children, instead of isolating them and saying that this is a terrible problem, we have to hide it, and you created it and you take care of it. I mean, it's a family member they've given up.
Exactly. You wrote this book because you wanted other women to know that there were other people in this situation, is that right?
Yes, because it was such a revealing thing to me to go to a support group and find out that other people had my story. I had been so isolated in my story and in my pain, thinking I was the crazy one, no one else was feeling this, because we had been told we would forget. And I just assumed they were probably right and there was something wrong with me. And in the support groups, women were telling very similar stories. And a lot of letters I get from the book are telling me, you've told my story. And that's what I wanted to happen, because it starts to bring up the feelings, and then you can begin to heal when you realize what happened.
Now, in your case, though, Carol, it turned out well. You found a loving family. You found a son who accepted you and was very happy to know that you existed. What about in a situation where that wouldn't happen? Isn't it always a chance that the person would not want to be found?
Well, there's always the chance, but I think when you prepare yourself, the odds are higher for successful reunions. The reunions that aren't successful are usually not successful because the pain hasn't been dealt with, the losses haven't been dealt with, and you don't even know they're there until it starts coming up. Those block successful reunions, but with a great deal of preparation, they can often be really great.
So you think your advice to someone watching this show who's had this experience would be try to find the child that you gave up?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
What is your life like now that you've found your son?
Well, it's just been such a growing experience. It's not easy to find a child that you just feel is your own. You know, it could be, I could have raised him. I felt that way when I met him. He wasn't a stranger to me. And the hard part for me is to know that he knows Rosemary as his mother, and he knows me in a different way, and that Christmas and Easter, those times he goes to her, and that's his family. And this is why it's not an easy thing, but it's absolutely worthwhile and something that you have to do. There's too many rewards not to, which is the relationship with him and the opportunity to know my grandchildren.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful story. The Other Mother, we really recommend it. It's available in Bay Area bookstores. Thank you for being here, Carol, to tell us about it. Thanks. Please stay with us. After community calendar and some messages, we'll get some tips for preparing for an earthquake. Hopefully there won't be one, but we'll get some tips just in case. Stay with us.
An unwed mother at the age of 19, Carol Schaefer was forced by convention and the circumstances of her Catholic upbringing to give up her infant son for adoption, an act which would have a profound emotional impact on her life. The Other Mother is her story. Publishers Weekly calls it a wrenching account and a moving testament to the bonding power of motherhood. The book is published by Soho, and Carol Schaefer is our guest on this edition of In Print. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm delighted you could join us to tell us your story. Was there ever a chance that you might have kept your infant son?
If I could have, I certainly would have. What was stunning to me when I looked back on the whole situation was that there wasn't one person that came forth to give me any hope of doing that or any way. The one consideration we perhaps could have had was that I could have gone on welfare and been out, you know, tried to do it on my own, but that was a worse stigma back then than being pregnant without a husband. And so I just simply didn't see a way, and no one came forth, which I found very interesting in retrospect.
Yeah, it was interesting to me that some years later you had actually become a social worker and encountered a young mother who might have been you had you kept your son.
I felt that way. And that was the first time I had to confront myself completely that there probably was a way I could have kept my son, because she even almost looked like me, you know, and I helped her. I kind of gave her a little extra money, and I helped her any way I could to do what she needed to do.
Indeed, yeah. You bent the rules a little bit in the interest of compassion.
Yes.
Another question, of course, that springs to mind is, well, there are two actually, and then we'll move on. Did you ever consider aborting the child?
Yes, we did. Well, I think that's the first thought that comes into any scared teenager's mind. You just want to get rid of the problem immediately. And, you know, everything was very unreal at the time. I didn't feel pregnant, I didn't look pregnant, and I just knew that I was pregnant. And so we were making decisions really in an unreal kind of atmosphere. And So I was sure we wanted to not have that problem anymore. But in the South, in the 60s, you would have to go to the Bahamas. There was no way for that, and I certainly couldn't find the money to go there, or the courage probably, or even want to, basically. But that was something we definitely thought through.
What ultimately happened, of course, was you didn't go to the Bahamas. You went to a place called Seton Hall,
Yes.
which to me is almost Dickensian in retrospect. And I will say that I think I shared the same feeling you did much later in your book when you found out that Seton Hall had closed its doors years
Yes.
later. But people are probably wondering what we're talking about. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about Seton Hall and the experience you had there.
Well, the alternative that I had, since we had decided the best thing to do was not to get married, was to go to a home for unwed mothers. There were plenty of them around back then. It certainly was a situation that you could expect to get into. It was almost like they were looming out there as